Right. Thank you, Mr. Heaney. Let's now go to page 43, Scope for Deloitte RWSS Business Case Peer Review. I'll hand that over to Mr. Drury. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason for this report is to clarify the scope of the peer review to be undertaken by Deloitte. You'll remember on the 18th of November, Alan Dent and Paul Callow spent some time with you, and there were discussions about what should be included in the peer review and what shouldn't. And to that end, there is a letter from them which is attached to this paper, which sets out their view of what a peer review should contain, which is in scope, and in their view what would be out of scope in a peer review. So that's there for councillors to have a look at and discuss. When commissioned, Deloitte do propose to have discussions with the investment company prior to Christmas about when they believe the financial close will be. I mean, that's getting tighter and tighter, so hopefully there will be some decisions there, and also the timing that Deloitte can get access to the financial model, which is really important, and other material, and it's got to be pitched at the right time when they are available and at a maturity that is worth checking. And it's also the intention of Deloitte to complete their peer review, if possible, to get it up to the same time as Council received the financial close documentation from HBRC. So, Mr. Chairman, we'll just take questions on probably the letter from Deloitte, which discusses what they believe is in scope and out of scope. And the resolution asks for receiving of the letter, but also the approving of the scope of the peer review as set out in that letter.
So I'll kick it off. Have they started any of this work?
No, they haven't.
When would they start?
Well, they will start when after the discussions with HBRC, which will be pretty much after this meeting, if indeed you resolve to move in the way they've set out here. And I believe they will start their assignment when initially when the financial model is at a maturity to be checked, and HBRC needs to feel that it is. So they need to work together on that.
Okay, questions? Councillor Belford.
I find it hard to separate questions from comments on this. I'll try to phrase some questions. There are two bullets under out of scope. The top two bullets, which were matters that were explored by Deloitte in their first report, albeit they took the view that it wasn't their job to inquire into the underlying consultant work and so forth and so on, which, okay, I don't agree with that, but I understand their view of that. But now you seem to be saying, and I guess what I would argue is that having looked at it once, the overall economic benefit argument for this, the land use and farm profitability assumptions behind it, those all have changed considerably. They addressed those issues as best they could the first time around, but now we're saying we don't need to re-examine those issues. But has there not been a substantial change in the land use assumptions that will drive the things on top of out of scope, water uptake as one example, but certainly the overall benefit? There have been substantial changes to what is expected to happen down there, and it would seem to me that it was well within bounds. In fact, when we asked Chairman Pierce the last time he was before us this kind of question, haven't the economics of this all changed because of a quite different footprint and land use assumption in that footprint? He said, well, it's not our job to sort that out. We're past that point. We're just going to build a dam. It's up to you and Deloitte, he said, to determine whether you think the economic benefit still stands. And yet we're saying, as if I'm reading this correctly, am I reading it correctly, that confirmation of the economic benefit is no longer a subject for us to be examining?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think the point that this particularly the first of the two bullet points, although it probably applies to both of them, we're asking Deloitte, if you like, to run a due diligence process over the information that's been given to us. There's no new economic analysis to be reviewed. So I guess what we're saying to them is, we're giving them information. We want them to audit it or to peer review it. But this implies that there would be a whole new piece of work undertaken by Deloitte to actually look at the economic analysis, and really that was never the specific intention of having them peer review the work that's come before it. I guess the other thing too to note is that this particular piece of work, the Deloitte piece of work, is but one of, I've no doubt, a number of due diligence processes that are being undertaken as part of this whole project by, particularly by other investors, and that as part of their work, they may be looking at that.
If I can follow up, this seems to put us in a catch-22 where HBRC is saying, not our job to defend the claim that this will have all of these wonderful benefits to the region. It's not our job to do that. We made our claims 3 years ago, and despite the fact that everything has changed since then, we're not going to look at it again. And then on our side, as a council, we're the only ones. None of those investors, no individual farmer, no one of those has to be concerned with whether the entire project is worth the candle. We have to make the judgment as to whether it's worth the candle, and we have to make that judgment based on some grounded assessment that fits the real world as we're looking at it today, as to whether the benefits claimed 3 years ago still stand. I'm personally quite skeptical that they do, and how could they with such a drastic change to the underlying
You're getting into
conditions?
your own views here, Councillor, which is where I thought we would end up. But is there any... Deloitte's would love to have half the scope again. They'd retire on it. So we've got to draw a line in the sand. I actually wonder whether the recommendation from council at that time would be worth exploring. It was quite simply to look at the business case, was it not?
Through Mr. Chairman, they did look at the economic analysis that was available at that time in the farm profitability. All those documents were available at the time they did their peer review. So their peer review was an incredibly comprehensive exercise, something 3 times as much time as they proposed to spend on this one. Here they're saying that they don't propose to revisit that. It's already been done, and I think they're alluding to, well, is there a report to check anyway?
But the reason we've asked them back was based on a very clear instruction from council at the time, at the June meeting last year, correct?
Correct, and it was to do a further peer review of the business case. It really depends on how wide your business case is. At the moment, they are certainly looking at the financial drivers of the business case.
Chairman, in the previous report, which I have here, business model, there's an entire chapter on the business model, and what that chapter is about is the McFarland report. It's about land use assumptions, et cetera, et cetera. They raised a whole series of questions about, we can't answer any of this because we don't have enough information. And now we're saying, well, sorry, we don't have any information.
Order, Councillor. We gave them a firm instruction at the time. We needed Deloitte to come back to look at the business case. End of story.
What's the business case?
Councillor Hewitt, we haven't seen it yet.
Thank you. So 2 things. The first, with the newly founded business case, if there are parts of the old one that are still considered up to date, can it just be reclipped into the new document?
Sorry, Councillor, are you talking about the Deloitte review? So they'll take that as their starting point, and what they'll be looking at now is any information that has materially changed the financial impacts of this project, or of council's investment in the project.
And if it hasn't materially changed, they'll leave it. I mean, they'll just cut and paste it.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank
So I guess, and this probably covers Councillor Belford's point to an extent, although he probably won't agree. But we're not asking Deloitte to actually green tick or otherwise the whole project. We're asking them to look at council's investment in the project.
Okay, thank you. Just out of scope, wider economic benefits. I get that this is out of the scope of Deloitte's, but I consider it might be a really valuable job that you might consider putting some of your staff onto, because the wider economic benefits are a story that could really be told and told and told again, and it may not fit into here, but it's another important part of bringing the community on the journey. And I wonder if you might have a look at the Hitoki Trade Training program as part of that, because there's a program in running that's started with Ngāi Tahu, and it took unemployed iwi youth from post-earthquake and gave them a trade skill, and there's a very real opportunity to model that here in Hawke's Bay for at-risk communities to be put into trade programs to be working on the dams. So could that be part of it?
We're only here to talk about Deloitte.
Well, yeah, but we've cut some things out, and when we had a meeting recently and we went around the table and said, what would you like to see in? And that was one of the things that some of us said we would like to see in. So if it's out, then where else can we have it being taken to the community?
Council role with economic development, I suppose, but simply here we're talking about Deloitte. Deloitte had put in every conceivable nuance they could, if they could, because they get paid for it. So we've got to have a fairly clear scope for them to deal with in this report.
Well, if we keep saying we're only talking about one thing and there's another thing that you could slot somewhere else, I think where else am I going to bring it up if you can't bring it up here?
I'm not sure the Deloitte process is where
Through you, Mr.
that
Chairman.
would be exposed.
I mean, it may well be worth having this conversation when HBRC are in front of you this afternoon, and just having a general conversation about that type of work and if and where it belongs.
Councillor Dick.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, isn't it in fact that uptake for particular land uses, which will be known at the time that this is done, is in fact a proxy for the issues of farm profitability, land use change, and in fact, to a large extent, a quantification of wider economic benefits. And also, isn't it a fact that there may have been some changes in the last 3 years, but there will also certainly be some changes in the next 3 years before water starts running down the irrigation races.
So the question on that, I think, is for you to decipher, Mr. Drew.
Well, no, I think Councillor Dick has summarised that amazingly well. I mean, when farmers sign up for water, they have a pretty comprehensive business plan for farms, and I think there can be a comfort that they wouldn't be investing in water and committing to water if they weren't going to do well out of it, and the region obviously will do well out of it from an economic standpoint. So that would be a valid assumption in my view.
So on a more serious note, though, just a question to the Chief Executive. So when Deloitte just didn't drive away from the meeting and come back with this, you've obviously been talking to them. What have been the touch points in that conversation to get to this letter?
Well, the touch points are, I mean, the most important thing for council, number one, I'm not saying anything else isn't important, but the number one thing is the investment of 80 million on behalf of the ratepayer. What is the business case? Does the business case stack up so as council can get a return on their money, or rather HBRC will get an eventual return from the Ruataniwha and filter it through to council? It needs to stack up from a financial perspective. That's the first one. are all the assumptions that lead to that financial model, and do they lead to financial viability? That's the big elephant in the room, and that's the most time-consuming thing. The other ones, which we've talked about, are the economic and farm profitability. I mean, council would really like to know that the farm profitability is going to be there. I think, as Councillor Dick says, it should be, because people are not going to sign up for water. They're business-driven. The economic analysis flows from those decisions. So just how much information does council need to be comfortable in that aspect?
Farmers are not dumb, or not many of them. Are they, Mr Chairman?
I'll let that lie. Other questions? Councillor Balfour.
Well, just continuing on Councillor Dick's point, I mean, when I read this, I drew a line from the second bullet, revisit of farm profitability analysis up to test basis for water take assumptions. I think he's absolutely right. Those two have to be linked, and we're going to be presented with uptake scenarios of various curve levels and the slopes that we will be asked to be comfortable with, and to me that is the core of what needs to be probed here, and you can't look at that without looking beneath the mathematics of, yes, they've calculated the slope and the cash flow from it properly, to the assumptions, which is assumptions is what's talked about here, and how carefully are they going to look at that, and do they feel they should be? Because I guess I'd ask for an interpretation of the first sentence in the second paragraph. It is now anticipated that all conditions precedent will be satisfied shortly. Well, wait a minute. I thought we were hiring these people to inquire for us as to whether that was the case or not, and particularly with respect to water take assumptions.
There is a question around it.
Yep. So the conditions precedent are the 4 conditions that council has imposed upon HBRC and essentially upon itself as the go, no-go point for its investment in the dam. They've also asked that, alongside of that Deloitte conduct another peer review of the financial case. So, as part of that, I mean, Deloitte will obviously be testing those assumptions, some of those assumptions that underline the conditions precedent. And for example, at the top of the second page of Alan's letter, 4th bullet point, test the basis for water uptake assumptions. So they'll be doing that as to the point of how it influences the income or your return on investment from the $80 million that's been proposed to be invested by this council.
Further questions? Someone happy to take us to the recommendations? And Councillor Dick, you wish to move? Someone happy to second that? Councillor Scott, you wish to speak?
I believe the terms of reference are quite appropriate.
Seconder? Other speakers? Councillor Graham?
I also get confused about when it's question time or when it's statement time. Clearly, the 4 first issues in the scope are good. They are the financial ones, and I get the fact that Mr. Jury said they are the most important things we are dealing with. They probably are, because that's the 80 million. But we also put in 80 million because of the social benefits and the economic development. And that's why I would like to revisit the economic analysis based on several things. I mean, there is fewer dairy farms, so the world has changed in 3 years, definitely changed. It was 30%, I doubt if it's 30% now, dairy farms. What I would like to know what the GDP effect is for our investment. I'd like to know how many containers of extra produce we're going to produce. We said, I recall 15,000 at one stage, but 5,000 was dairying. So what's the added value to our port in this investment. So the investment, of course, we need to secure the financial. We need to get our return, and we need to make sure that it's financial. I guess we can leverage off other investors coming in that they understand these things better than us. So if they put their dollars in on the same, but they're not putting on the same conditions, but on similar conditions to us, we get some confidence out of that. But this 80 million that we're putting in here is more to do with economic development in this region, in our entire region, than it is to do with us getting return on investment, or equally. So I would like to see that in. I support Councillor Hewitt on that. That is a very important part of this. We did hear Chairman Pearce say that it was not his concern, and I guess that's correct. Their HBRC's concern is to build a dam. Our concern is, how good is this going to be to our community when it's finished, or when it's going as well? And I completely disagree with yourself and Councillor Dick about the farmers. Farmers will make a decision for themselves. This is not about 150 farmers just making profits. And you say that it'll on-flow to the community. Well, I want to know what that on-flow to the community is.
Thank you. Other speakers? Councillor Belford?
Yes, to second what Councillor Graham has just said, I mean, we were told in the port presentation that the benefits of water bottling to the region were 65,000 containers. By comparison, he mentioned the 10 to 15,000 that were claimed, expected by the port to come out of this project, and the farm trades that some of you will have seen that just came out this week are all talking about this wonderful dairy plant down in south of us that's going to get any dairying that does occur in the southern part of Central Hawke's Bay. So the issue of what we ultimately need to decide has to do with what risk are we taking here, and how certain are we that the benefits claimed will be produced. And only one part of that is the purely financial. Will we get a 6% return at X level of take-up? That's one little piece of this. Big, not a little piece, it's a big piece of this, but it's only a piece of it. And that all needs to be retested at this point. We need to see a scenario. If we're about risk and protecting our ratepayers from risk, we need to see from Deloitte a worst-case scenario that says people don't go beyond the startup take-up rate. They find, in fact, they don't use the water. There's not a big market for additional sales. We need to be at 60 million, according to the old business plan, for this thing to truly be viable, not 40, not 45, it's 60. And so part of the risk assessment that Deloitte should be doing is, well, wait a minute, what if this falls apart? Where does the pain fall if this falls apart? If we have flattened out and HBRC can't find enough out-of-region buyers to replace the farmers who have already decided they don't want the water because they made a smart decision, we need to find new farmers, apparently, because we have too many saying no who already live in Central Hawke's Bay. So it suggests to me there's a fair amount of risk involved in this enterprise at this point, and I just want to be sure that Deloitte's is entering into it with that framework or that mentality in mind, not an assumption reflected on page 1 of their letter here that all these conditions have been met and we're just tidying up the bow.
Councillor Bevan?
Chair, yeah, I'll support this, but I'm hearing what Councillor Belford and Graham and Hewitt have said about this, and you know, the whole basis of our original decision to invest in this proposition was based on much wider community benefits around job creation and so forth. And clearly that's changed since that original prognosis was done. And there will be a different changed use from what was anticipated. And some of the takers of the water from the dam have already got groundwater consents, and they're not going to be building pipe work. So the add-on expenditure, capital spent on farm is not going to be the same as what was anticipated in the original proposition either. So there are some differences there that I actually think we owe it to the public to explore. So I'd also like to think that the staff will go away and at least engage with Deloitte or maybe someone else on what at least the cost would be for picking up the revisiting of the economic analysis part, which is currently excluded, just so we know, you know, what's the cost of that going to be, and can we pick it up and do it, because I think we really owe it to the ratepayer to do so.
If I could just take a moment to comment. I think everyone's got some admirable intention here. I get that feeling. This particular process, in my view, is not the place to do it. Deloitte's would come and measure every single thing they could if they could get away with it. And good on them. I'm not a shareholder in Deloitte's, but someone is somewhere. And they like to have plenty of work going in front of them. So this particular set of terms is to satisfy a particular request that was decided at a council meeting last year, and to give us the final, if you like, piece of satisfaction about our investment, full stop. The extra piece is hugely important, and I can't argue with any of the sentiment I've heard around the table, but this particular process is not the place to get that done. So I think Councillor Bevan's view is quite sage, actually, that there is an opportunity to do some more work on this stuff, and it is hugely important. But it is not part of this particular process, and on that basis I'm happy to support this. Councillor Scott.
I will exercise my right to speak, Mr Chairman, and this is a review of the business case that was presented to us in the first place. It's a revalidation of what's changed in the time since the first one was put, what needs to be updated, where do we need to get to with that. Therefore, I think the scope of it is quite correct, but there are a lot of people doing due diligence around whether this is going to be financially successful, and that ranges from the individual farmers who've made the decision to invest to the corporate investors, and includes HBRC. So all of that due diligence about the soundness of the investment will actually come through the conditions precedent. The risk around whether the water will be there will be water uptake is actually one of the conditions precedent, and those people have signed in to take it. They can't turn around the next day and say, oh no, I've changed my mind. So again, it's just that's being met through the conditions precedent. And I do actually question whether HBRC are only here to build a dam. They have a statement of intent, Mr Chairman. That is not in their statement of intent. Their statement of intent is to return an investment to this council. And we need to be absolutely plain that that's what they're here for. So I'm quite confident about the fact that they will be well aware of that in presenting their part of the information. The economic benefit to the region, and I hear what Councillor Hewitt is saying, she wants to hear that story as being part of a really good news story. But I don't believe that this is a validation of the business case, and I think the appropriate place to bring that up is with HBRC to see where we can progress that and progress that knowledge into an up-to-date information that can get out there publicly. So I'm pleased to second this motion that the scope of the revalidation is appropriate.
Right. You wish to sum up, Councillor Dick? With your microphone on?
Just very briefly, I think Councillor Scott has covered issues particularly well. The matters of risk referred to by Councillor Belford, I'm totally confident that they will be dealt with conclusively by Deloitte. And in terms of the economic benefit from the region, well, that will be deduced, I believe, as a consequence of this report. And I don't see the need for another intensive study, because As has been mentioned, things have changed dramatically in 3 years. Things are changing dramatically as we speak. The important thing is that farmers have made their economic decision to invest and take water. Investors have done their due diligence carefully to ensure that their investment is a safe investment, and we have conclusively done so as well. This whole project has been studied and restudied ad infinitum.
Okay. I'll put the motion then. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Carried. I don't know, we need a show of hands, maybe a show of hands just to make sure there was and against. Cool. Okay, cool. That motion is passed. Thank you. Right.